When we watch a screen, we rely on the protection of the fourth wall. It is the silent, psychological understanding that the events unfolding in the video are trapped in the glass, unable to reach the viewer. This relationship is built on a one-way flow of information. The screen gives us the power to observe every detail of a scene without the vulnerability of being seen ourselves. That sense of safety hinges entirely on the screen remaining a one-way mirror. If the subject of the footage looks back, the observer is no longer protected by the glass. Daniel found the source of his undoing at a garage sale. He paid $20 for an old, unlabeled camcorder, thinking he'd found a vintage tech bargain. The seller was visibly shaking during the transaction. Before Daniel could leave, the man gripped his arm and offered a single, cryptic instruction. "Whatever you do, don't watch the tapes after midnight." Daniel dismissed the warning. The barrier between a physical tape and his living room was absolute. He treated the old man's fear as a theatrical hook, rather than a genuine threat. At 12:30 a.m., he ignored the rule and hooked the camcorder to his TV. He picked up the first of 3 blank, completely unlabeled tapes and firmly pushed it into the deck. Daniel's decision to ignore the clock transformed the camcorder into an active trigger. The machine was no longer a simple playback device. It was a mechanism for an encounter he had invited into his home. The first tape showed a distorted, vintage recording of a family dinner, a mother, a son, and a father behind the lens. It looked like any other home movie from decades ago, but in the background, standing perfectly still in the kitchen doorway, was a tall, dark figure. The family continued their meal, completely unaware of the shadow looming just a few feet away. The video cut to black, replaced by a single line of distorted white text. "He only moves when you look away." Daniel laughed it off as a clever bit of editing. Because the footage was old and grainy, he still felt like a distant observer, separated from the threat by the passage of time. The second tape changed the tone. It showed the same house from the first video, but the family was gone. The rooms were silent, empty, and dark. The camera began to move through the house. Every few seconds, the dark figure would appear in a different room, standing closer to the lens with every jump in the footage. At the very end of the tape, the camera entered a bedroom. There, hanging on the wall beside the bed, was the exact jacket Daniel was wearing as he sat on his couch. Daniel had never been to that house, yet a tape from the past somehow showed his own clothing. The recording was no longer just a history of someone else's life, it was showing details from his own. Daniel tried to stop the playback, but the camcorder turned itself back on. It began playing a new recording without any input from him. The TV screen showed a live feed of his own living room. The camera was positioned in the dark hallway just outside his bedroom, aimed directly at the back of his head. To test the reality of the image, Daniel stood up. On the television, he watched himself rise from the couch in perfect synchronization. The live broadcast removed any doubt about his situation. He was no longer the one watching a recording. He was the subject of the video being filmed from inside his own apartment. On the television, the tall, dark figure stepped out of the hallway shadows and stood directly behind the version of Daniel on the screen. Daniel spun around to face the empty room, seeing nothing but his own furniture. When he looked back at the TV, the figure was inches away from him, its face contorted into a wide, horrible smile. The television went black, leaving Daniel in the dark. The next morning, the police found the apartment empty. The front door was still locked from the inside. No signs of a struggle, no broken windows, and no fingerprints. Daniel was gone. The entity didn't need to force its way through a physical entrance. It had used the screen as a bridge into his reality. The only evidence left behind was the camcorder, which was still recording when the authorities arrived. The final tape showed Daniel sitting on his couch, focused on the screen. It revealed that the dark figure had been standing silently behind him from the moment he inserted the first tape. The midnight warning was a safeguard for the viewer. Pressing play after hours turns the screen into a two-way door. By the time Daniel noticed the figure in the footage, the figure had already found him.